one man survived 438 days adrift at sea. A flight attendant fell over 6 miles from a plane and lived. A doctor in Antarctica performed surgery on himself. A family drank turtle blood to survive after orcas sank their yacht. An explorer, left for dead, crawled across the Antarctic ice. These tales sound like fiction, but they happened. Number 12. The fisherman who vanished at sea for over a year. José Alvarenga was a fisherman from El Salvador working in Mexico. On November 17, 2012, he set off from the coast of Chiapas, Mexico, for a planned 30-hour deep-sea fishing trip. He was accompanied by a younger, less experienced fisherman named Ezequiel Cordoba. They were in a small, open-topped fiberglass boat, about 7 meters, 23 feet long, with a single outboard motor and an icebox for storing fish. A few hours into their trip, a powerful storm hit. The storm lasted for 5 days, battering their small boat and pushing them far off course. Their motor failed. They lost their fishing gear, their anchor, and most of their electronics. Alvarenga managed to make a brief radio call to his boss, reporting they were lost and in trouble, but then the radio died. They were adrift in the vast Pacific Ocean. Their initial supplies were meager. A small amount of food and water they had brought for the short trip. These ran out quickly. To survive, Alvarenga, an experienced seaman, began catching fish with his bare hands when they swam close to the boat. He also caught turtles and seabirds that landed on their vessel. They drank rainwater when it fell, and when it didn't, they sometimes resorted to drinking turtle blood, or in extreme desperation, their own urine. Cordoba struggled to adapt to this diet and the harsh conditions. He reportedly refused to eat raw food for long periods and became increasingly despondent. After about 4 months adrift, Cordoba died. Alvarenga has said he kept Cordoba's body on the boat for several days talking to it, before eventually putting it overboard. Alvarenga continued alone. He marked the passing months by the phases of the moon. He battled loneliness, despair, and hallucinations. He described seeing ships in the distance on several occasions, but none saw him or his small boat. He protected himself from the scorching sun by hiding inside the icebox. He continued to catch fish, birds, and turtles. He learned to snatch birds as they rested on the boat. He would eat them whole, sometimes feathers and all, to get every bit of nourishment. He carefully rationed any fresh water he could collect. For months he drifted westward, carried by ocean currents. On January 30th, 2014, after an astonishing 438 days at sea, Alvarenga spotted land. It was a tiny, remote coral atoll called Ibon, part of the Marshall Islands. He had drifted an estimated 10,800 kilometers, 6,700 miles, across the Pacific. His boat washed ashore. He was emaciated with long hair and a bushy beard, but he was alive. He was found by local islanders. He was unable to walk without assistance initially, and was severely dehydrated and malnourished. He had survived what is considered one of the longest solo voyages adrift ever recorded. Number 11. The teenager who fell 2 miles into the Amazon rainforest and walked out. On Christmas Eve, 1971, LANSA Flight 508, a Lockheed L-188A Electra turboprop, was flying from Lima to Pucallpa, Peru. Among the 92 people on board was 17-year-old Julian Kopecky, traveling with her mother, Maria. Julian was planning to spend Christmas with her father, Hans Wilhelm Kopecky, a renowned German zoologist working at a research station in the Amazon rainforest. About 25 minutes after takeoff, while flying at an altitude of around 21,000 feet, 6,400 meters, the plane encountered a severe thunderstorm. Intense turbulence began to shake the aircraft. Passengers saw lightning striking one of the wings. Suddenly, the plane began to break apart in mid-air. Julianne remembered seeing the wing on fire. She was still strapped into her seat when she was ejected from the disintegrating plane. She fell, still attached to a row of 3 seats, approximately 2 miles, over 3,000 meters, into the dense canopy of the Peruvian rainforest. Miraculously, Julianne survived the fall. She regained consciousness the next morning, alone, still strapped to her seat. She had a broken collarbone, a deep gash on her arm, an eye injury, and a concussion. The dense foliage of the rainforest canopy had likely cushioned her impact. She was surrounded by the wreckage of the plane and the bodies of other passengers. She called out for her mother, but received no reply. Knowing her parents were biologists who had taught her survival skills, Julianne decided her best chance was to find water and follow it downstream, as this often leads to civilization. She found a small stream and began to walk along its banks. She had lost one shoe and her glasses in the fall. She had only a ripped, sleeveless mini dress. The jungle was teeming with insects. Mosquito bites became infected. She had a wound on her arm that became infested with maggots. She had found a bag of candy, which became her only food. For 11 days, Julianne waded through streams, pushed through dense undergrowth, and battled insects and exhaustion. She remembered her father's advice that water always runs downhill and that small streams flow into larger ones, which often lead to human settlements. She heard kingfisher birds, which indicated she was near a larger body of water. She eventually reached a larger river. On the 10th day, she came across a small empty hut and a moored boat. She decided to rest in the hut, hoping its owners would return. She used gasoline she found in an outboard motor fuel tank to clean the maggots from her arm wound, a technique she recalled her father using for a similar problem with their dog. The next day, a group of local lumbermen found her. They were astonished to see her. They gave her food, treated her wounds as best they could, and then took her by canoe on a 7-hour journey to a small village. From there, she was airlifted to a hospital in Pucallpa. Julianne Kopke was the sole survivor of LANSA Flight 508. Number 10. The mountain man who outran his attackers naked. John Colter was an American trapper and explorer, a member of the famous Lewis and Clark expedition from 1804 to 1806. After the expedition, Colter chose to stay in the wilderness of the American West, becoming one of the first mountain men. His knowledge of the rugged terrain was extensive. Around 1807 or 1808, he is credited by some as being the first European American to see the thermal wonders of what is now Yellowstone National Park. In the autumn of 1809, Colter was trapping beaver with a companion named John Potts near the Jefferson River in present-day Montana. This area was territory of the Blackfoot Nation, who were often hostile to American trappers. One morning, as they were checking their traps in canoes, they were surrounded by several hundred Blackfoot warriors. Potts resisted, firing his rifle and killing one of the warriors. He was immediately killed in retaliation, shot full of arrows. Colter, realizing resistance was futile, surrendered. The Blackfoot warriors stripped Colter completely naked. After some deliberation, they decided to give him a sporting chance. They told him to run for his life, indicating they would chase him. Colter, knowing this was likely his only chance, however slim, began to run. He was a strong runner, but he was naked, barefoot, and running over rough terrain, including prickly pear cactus. The warriors gave him a head start of a few hundred yards before they began their pursuit. Colter ran with all his might. The chase continued for several miles. He was bleeding from his nose, and his feet were torn and raw. Looking back, he saw that he had outdistanced most of his pursuers, except for one warrior who was gaining on him, armed with a spear. Colter, nearly exhausted, suddenly stopped, turned, and confronted the warrior. The surprised warrior stumbled as he tried to thrust his spear, and Colter managed to seize the spear, which broke in his hand. He used the pointed end to kill the warrior. He then resumed running. He reached the Madison River, about 5 miles from where he started. He saw a large beaver lodge near the bank and dived into the icy water, managing to get inside the lodge. The Blackfoot warriors searched for him along the riverbank, even standing on top of the beaver lodge, but they couldn't find him. He remained hidden in the lodge until nightfall. Once it was dark, he swam downstream for a considerable distance to evade any lingering pursuers. Colter then faced an 11-day journey completely naked, without food or shelter, to reach the safety of a trading post called Fort Raymond, also known as Manuel Lisa's Fort, on the Bighorn River, a distance of about 250 miles. He survived on roots and bark. He arrived at the fort emaciated and exhausted, but alive. His survival became a legend of the American frontier known as Colter's Run. Number 9. The family that survived 38 days adrift after killer whales sank their yacht. Dougal Robertson was a Scottish dairy farmer with a passion for the sea. In 1971, he, his wife Lynn, their 18-year-old son Douglas, 16-year-old daughter Anne, and 12-year-old twin sons Neil and Sandy set sail from Falmouth, England, aboard their 43-foot wooden schooner, the Lucette. They planned to circumnavigate the globe. Anne left the voyage in the Bahamas. A young student named Robin Williams joined them in Panama. On June 15, 1972, about 17 months into their journey, disaster struck. The Lucette was about 200 miles west of the Galapagos Islands, in the Pacific Ocean, when it was attacked by a pod of orcas, killer whales. The whales rammed the wooden hull repeatedly. Within minutes, the schooner was holed and sinking rapidly. The family and Robin had less than a minute to abandon ship. They managed to scramble into their inflatable rubber life raft and also retrieve their small fiberglass dinghy, the Edna, which was towed behind. They salvaged a few supplies, a bag of onions, some biscuits, a dozen oranges, lemons, and some glucose. They had very little water. They were 6 people crammed into a raft designed for fewer, with the small dinghy in tow. They were thousands of miles from any shipping lanes. Dougal, a former master mariner, took charge. Their immediate priority was water. They collected rainwater when they could. Using a canvas awning, food was scarce. They ate their meager initial supplies sparingly. Soon, they had to rely on catching turtles, dorado, and flying fish. They used a gaff made from an oar and a sharpened tin opener. They ate the fish and turtles raw. They drank turtle blood and spinal fluid for hydration when rainwater was insufficient. The inflatable raft began to deteriorate under the harsh sun and constant use. After 16 days, it deflated beyond repair. They all had to transfer to the tiny 9-foot 8-inch Edna dinghy. It was incredibly cramped for 6 people. They battled constant hunger, thirst, exposure to the sun, and storms. Dougal kept a log, and Lynn, a trained nurse, tended to their injuries and saltwater boils. They maintained a strict routine and discipline, which Dougal believed was crucial for their morale and survival. They used every part of the turtles they caught: the meat for food, the blood for drink, the fat for rubbing on their skin to protect it from the sun and salt. After 38 grueling days adrift, on July 23, 1972, they were spotted by a Japanese fishing trawler, the Toka Maru II. They were severely emaciated, dehydrated, and suffering from exposure, but all 6 were alive. They had drifted over 750 nautical miles. Their story of resilience and resourcefulness as a family became a celebrated tale of survival at sea. Number 8. The real Robinson Crusoe, who lived alone on an island for 4 years. Alexander Selkirk was a Scottish privateer, a kind of state-sanctioned pirate in the early 18th century. In 1703, he joined an expedition led by Captain William Dampier, serving as sailing master aboard the Cinque Ports, a galley ship. The expedition was plagued by poor leadership and hardship. By 1704, the Cinque Ports was in bad condition, leaking badly. In September 1704, the ship stopped for supplies and water at one of the uninhabited islands of the Juan Fernandez archipelago, about 400 miles off the coast of Chile. Selkirk became deeply concerned about the seaworthiness of the Cinque Ports. He believed it was likely to sink, and tried to persuade some of his crewmates to desert with him, planning to await a later ship. However, no one else agreed. When the ship's captain, Thomas Stradling, learned of Selkirk's intentions and his vocal concerns, an argument ensued. Selkirk declared he would rather stay on the island than continue on the leaky vessel. Stradling took him at his word. Selkirk was put ashore on Massa Tierra, now known as Robinson Crusoe Island, in October 1704. He was left with a musket, a hatchet, a knife, a cooking pot, some bedding, a Bible, and some navigational instruments. He initially expected to be picked up by another English ship relatively soon. He stayed near the shore, scanning the horizon. He ate shellfish and watched for ships. The loneliness and the terrifying sounds of seals and sea lions on the beaches at night deeply affected him. As months passed with no sign of rescue, Selkirk realized he needed to adapt to survive long-term. He moved inland to escape the noisy seals and find better shelter. He built 2 small huts from pimento trees, one for cooking and one for sleeping. He learned to hunt the feral goats that inhabited the island, descendants of animals left by earlier sailors. He became proficient at running them down. He used their meat for food and their skins for clothing and bedding. He had to contend with large rats that gnawed at his feet and clothes at night. He managed to domesticate some wild cats, which helped control the rat population. He read his Bible regularly, which he later said helped him maintain his sanity. He learned to make fire by rubbing 2 pieces of pimento wood together after his gunpowder ran out. He carved notches on a tree to keep track of time. He foraged for wild turnips, watercress, and berries. He became incredibly fit from his active lifestyle. He was on the island for 4 years and 4 months. Finally, on February 2nd, 1709, 2 English privateering ships, the Duke and the Duchess, captained by Woodes Rogers, arrived at the island. Selkirk, dressed in goat skins, lit a signal fire. A landing party found him. He was overjoyed, but had almost lost the ability to speak English coherently. He returned to England in 1711. His incredible story of solitary survival is widely believed to have been a primary inspiration for Daniel Defoe's famous novel, Robinson Crusoe. Number 7. The commando who evaded the Nazis across Arctic Norway for months. Jan Balsrud was a Norwegian commando and instrument maker. During World War II, after Norway was occupied by Nazi Germany, Balsrud escaped to Britain and joined the Norwegian resistance forces being trained there. In March 1943, he was part of a 12-man team on a mission called Operation Martin. Their fishing boat, the Brattholm, carrying explosives to sabotage German military installations, was betrayed. Off the coast of northern Norway, near Tromsø, their boat was attacked by a German patrol vessel. Commandos scuttled the Brattholm with their explosives. 11 of them were captured or killed. Balsrud was the only one to escape. He managed to swim ashore in the icy Arctic waters, losing one boot in the process. He was soaking wet, lightly clothed, and had only one rubber boot. Thus began an epic 2-month ordeal of evasion and survival in the harsh Arctic winter landscape, pursued by German patrols. Balsrud sought help from Norwegian civilians in the small coastal villages. Despite the extreme risk of severe reprisals from the Germans for aiding a fugitive, many ordinary Norwegians sheltered him, fed him, and guided him. He was passed from one group of helpers to another, moving through snow-covered mountains and fjords. He suffered terribly from frostbite, particularly in his feet, and snow blindness. At one point, he was caught in an avalanche and buried in snow for several days, surviving only because he found an air pocket. His condition deteriorated. He developed severe gangrene in his toes. Hiding in a remote snow cave for nearly 3 weeks, delirious and starving, he was forced to perform self-amputation on several of his toes with a pocket knife to stop the spread of infection. He was so weak he could barely move. Local villagers built him a stretcher and carried him through blizzards and across treacherous mountain terrain, always trying to stay ahead of German patrols. He was hidden in huts, caves, and even a snowdrift hollowed out for him, which he called his snow hotel. Eventually, his Norwegian helpers managed to get him close to the border of neutral Sweden. Reindeer herders from the Sami indigenous population took over the final perilous leg of the journey. They transported him on a reindeer-pulled sled across the mountains into Sweden. He arrived in Sweden in late May 1943, emaciated and having lost about half his body weight, but alive. He had traveled through some of the most inhospitable terrains in Europe, aided by dozens of courageous Norwegians. After recovering, he rejoined the Allied war effort. Number 6. The noblewoman marooned on an island of demons with her lover. Marguerite de la Roque was a young French noblewoman in the mid-16th century. Around 1541 or 1542, she embarked on a colonizing expedition to Canada, led by her relative, Jean-François de la Roque de Roberval, who was commissioned by King Francis I of France to establish a French colony in North America. During the long sea voyage, Marguerite began an affair with a young man on board. Roberval, a stern Calvinist, disapproved strongly of her conduct. As punishment for her illicit relationship, and possibly to make an example of her, Roberval decided to maroon Marguerite, her lover, and her maidservant, Damienne, on a remote, uninhabited island in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, off the coast of Quebec. This island was known as the Isle of Demons because of local legends about evil spirits and dangerous beasts. Roberval left them with some firearms, ammunition, and basic supplies. Life on the desolate island was incredibly harsh. They had to build a shelter and learn to hunt and forage for food. They faced extreme weather, isolation, and the constant threat of wild animals. The emotional and physical toll was immense. After some time on the island, Marguerite gave birth to a child. However, the conditions were too severe. Her lover, the maidservant, and eventually her infant child, all died. Sources differ on the exact timeline, but it's thought they perished over a period of about 18 months to 2 years. Marguerite was left completely alone. She had to find the strength to survive in the face of unimaginable loss and solitude. She continued to hunt for food, using the firearms Roberval had left her. She reportedly killed bears and other animals for sustenance and to protect herself. She endured for several more months in total isolation. After approximately 2.5 years on the island, Marguerite was finally rescued. In 1544, she was spotted by Basque fishermen who were in the area. They took her back to France. Her story caused a sensation. She recounted her ordeal, and it was later recorded by various writers, including Queen Marguerite de Navarre in her work, Heptameron. Though details vary slightly between accounts, the core story of her abandonment and survival remains a chilling testament to human endurance. She is one of the earliest recorded European women to have lived for an extended period in what is now Canada. Number 5. The doctor who cut himself open to save his own life in Antarctica. Leonid Rogozov was a 27-year-old Soviet surgeon. In 1960, he was assigned to the Novolazarevskaya station, a newly established Soviet Antarctic research base. He was part of the 6th Soviet Antarctic expedition and was the only medical doctor among the 13 researchers stationed there for the winter. Once the Antarctic winter set in, the station was completely isolated from the outside world by months of darkness, blizzards, and impenetrable sea ice. No aircraft could reach them. In late April 1961, Rogozov began to feel unwell. He experienced weakness, nausea, and then severe pain in the lower right side of his abdomen, accompanied by a fever. As a surgeon, he quickly diagnosed himself with acute appendicitis. He knew that if his appendix ruptured, it would almost certainly be fatal without surgical intervention. And he was the only one who could perform that surgery. There was no possibility of evacuation. After a day of conservative treatment, antibiotics, local cooling, failed to improve his condition, and with his symptoms worsening, Rogozov made a momentous decision. He would have to operate on himself. He meticulously planned the procedure. He instructed 2 of his colleagues, a meteorologist and a mechanic, to assist him. They were to hand him instruments, hold a mirror so he could see what he was doing, though he found the inverted view unhelpful and ended up working mostly by touch, and be ready to administer an injection if he lost consciousness. He also gave them instructions on how to perform artificial respiration if needed. On the night of April 30th to May 1st, 1961, the operation began. Rogozov administered a local anesthetic, Novocaine solution, to his abdominal wall. He made the incision himself. Working without gloves, he had to rely on his sense of touch as he couldn't fully see the operative field. The operation was incredibly difficult and painful. Despite the local anesthetic, he had to take frequent short breaks due to weakness and dizziness. He carefully located his inflamed appendix. He discovered it was already showing signs of incipient perforation. He estimated he had perhaps only a day before it would have burst. He excised the appendix and applied antibiotics directly into the peritoneal cavity. After nearly 2 hours of intense concentration and physical strain, he sutured the incision. His assistants had remained calm and followed his instructions. Within a few days, Rogozov's temperature returned to normal, and his condition began to improve. He removed his own stitches after a week. Within 2 weeks, he was able to resume his regular duties at the station. His self-surgery remains an extraordinary example of medical improvisation and courage under extreme circumstances. Number 4. The Antarctic explorer who crawled back from the brink of death. Sir Douglas Mawson was an Australian geologist and Antarctic explorer. He led the Australasian Antarctic Expedition, AAE, from 1911 to 1914, which aimed to chart a large section of the Antarctic coastline south of Australia. In November 1912, Mawson set out from the expedition's main base at Cape Denison with two companions, Lieutenant Belgrave Ninnis and Swiss mountaineer Dr. Xavier Mertz, on a sledging journey called the Far Eastern Party. Their goal was to explore King George V Land. They had 3 sledges pulled by 16 dogs. On December 14, 1912, about 300 miles, 480 km, east of their base, tragedy struck. Ninnis, along with the best sledge carrying most of their food supplies, 6 of their best dogs and their tent, plunged into a deep hidden crevasse. Mertz and Mawson peered into the abyss, but could see no sign of Ninnis or the sledge. They were lost. This left Mawson and Mertz with only 10 days' worth of food for themselves, and very little for the remaining dogs, facing a return journey of hundreds of miles through uncharted, treacherous, icy terrain. They immediately turned back, rationing their meager supplies. To supplement their food, they began to kill and eat their sledging dogs. Both men started to suffer from the effects of what is now believed to be hypervitinosis, a poisoning from consuming large quantities of husky dog liver, which is extremely rich in vitamin A. Mertz, a vegetarian unaccustomed to such a diet, deteriorated more rapidly. He suffered from stomach pains, delirium, and skin peeling. On January 7, 1913, Mertz died, leaving Mawson completely alone, about 100 miles, 160 km, from the main base. Mawson was in a desperate state. He was physically weakened, his skin was peeling, his hair was falling out, and the soles of his feet had detached. He improvised a new, smaller sledge from the remains of one of theirs, cut in half with a pocket knife. He had very little food. He began a torturous solo trek back to base. At one point, he fell into a crevasse and was saved only by the sledge, which caught on the lip, leaving him dangling by the harness. He managed to climb out. A feat of incredible strength and will. This happened again, and he considered giving up, but a sense of duty to his expedition drove him on. Pushed himself relentlessly, often crawling when he could no longer walk. He found a small depot of food left by a search party, which gave him a vital boost. After nearly a month alone, on February 8, 1913, he finally staggered within sight of the main base hut at Cape Denison. He saw the expedition ship, the Aurora, in the distance, sailing away. It had waited for them as long as it could. However, 5 men had remained behind at the base to search for the lost party. They saw Mawson and rushed to his aid. He was emaciated and barely alive, but he had made it. He had to spend another winter in Antarctica before he could return home. Number 3. The Arctic seamstress who became an unlikely lone survivor. Ida Geka, born Ada Delituk, was an Inupiat woman from Nome, Alaska. She was a young, impoverished widow with a chronically ill son. In 1921, needing money to care for her son, she reluctantly joined a controversial and ill-planned Arctic expedition organized by Vilhjalmur Stefansson. Stefansson aimed to claim Wrangel Island, north of Siberia, for Canada or Great Britain. Ada was hired as a seamstress and cook for the expedition. Despite having very limited experience of wilderness survival, she had been raised in a Methodist mission and knew little about traditional Inupiat hunting and survival skills. The expedition team consisted of 4 young, inexperienced white men: Alan Crawford, leader, Lorne Knight, Fred Maurer, Milton Gallo, and Ada. They were landed on Wrangel Island in September 1921 with provisions intended for 6 months, expecting a relief ship the following summer. However, the ice conditions in the summer of 1922 prevented the relief ship from reaching them. The party faced a second harsh Arctic winter with dwindling supplies. As their situation grew more desperate, the men's health began to fail. Lorne Knight developed scurvy. In January 1923, Crawford, Maurer, and Gala set off across the frozen Chukchi Sea towards Siberia to seek help and supplies, leaving Ada behind to care for the ailing Knight. The three men were never seen again and are presumed to have perished. Ada was now alone with Knight, who was bedridden and increasingly difficult. She had to learn to hunt, trap, and survive in the brutal Arctic environment entirely on her own. She taught herself to set traps for Arctic foxes, to shoot birds, and to build a more robust shelter. She had to fend off polar bears. She nursed Knight as best she could, despite his often abusive behavior towards her. He died in June 1923. For 2 months after Knight's death, Ada Gaiteich was completely alone on Wrangel Island. She faced extreme loneliness, fear, and the constant struggle for food and warmth. She kept a diary, recording her daily activities and her thoughts. She showed remarkable resilience and ingenuity, mastering skills she had never possessed before. She successfully hunted seals and foxes, built a boat from driftwood and animal skins, and managed to keep herself alive against all odds. On August 19, 1923, a rescue ship chartered by Stefansson's former associate, Harold Noyce, finally reached Wrangel Island. They found Ada Gaiteich, the sole survivor of the ill-fated expedition. She had endured nearly 2 years on the island, the last several months in complete isolation. She returned to Alaska with very little financial compensation for her ordeal. Her quiet courage and resourcefulness in the face of such extreme adversity earned her the nickname the female Robinson Crusoe. Number 2. The flight attendant who survived a 6-mile fall from an exploding plane. Vesna Volovic was a 22-year-old flight attendant for JAT Yugoslav Airlines. On January 26, 1972, she was part of the crew on JAT Flight 367, flying from Stockholm to Belgrade with a stopover in Copenhagen. Volovic later stated she was not even supposed to be on that flight. There had been a mix-up with another flight attendant, also named Vesna. The aircraft, a McDonnell Douglas DC-9, was cruising at an altitude of 10,160 meters, approximately 33,330 feet, or over 6.3 miles, over Sirbicka Kamenis in Czechoslovakia, now the Czech Republic, when a bomb believed to have been planted by Croatian Ustaše separatists detonated in the baggage compartment. The explosion tore the plane apart in mid-air. Debris, luggage, and bodies were scattered over a wide area of snowy wooded terrain. Vesna Volovic was in the tail section of the aircraft when the explosion occurred. She was reportedly pinned by a food cart against the rear wall of the plane as the tail section broke away and plummeted towards the ground. The section of fuselage she was in, along with parts of the wings, crashed into a steep, snow-covered mountainside. The dense snow and the angle of the slope are thought to have cushioned the impact significantly. A villager named Bruno Honk, who had been a medic during World War II, heard the explosion and rushed to the crash site. He found Volovic amidst the wreckage. She was alive, but critically injured. He heard her moaning. Her legs were trapped, and she was partially outside the fuselage. Onka provided first aid until rescuers arrived. Volovic was the only survivor among the 28 passengers and crew. She suffered a fractured skull, 2 crushed vertebrae, which left her temporarily paralyzed from the waist down, a broken pelvis, several broken ribs, and both legs broken. She was in a coma for several days. Some reports say 27 days, others 3 or 10 days. She had amnesia regarding the incident itself, Her last memory before the crash was greeting passengers in Copenhagen, and her first memory after was seeing her parents in the hospital about a month later. Her survival was considered a medical miracle. Doctors attributed it to a combination of factors: her low blood pressure, which may have caused her to pass out quickly when the cabin depressurized and prevented her heart from bursting on impact, being trapped in the fuselage section which protected her somewhat, and the heavily wooded snow-covered terrain that cushioned the fall. She spent months in the hospital and underwent multiple surgeries. Eventually, she regained the ability to walk, though she retained a limp. Vesna Volovic holds the Guinness World Record for surviving the highest fall without a parachute. She later returned to work for JAT in a desk job, but was not permitted to fly again as a flight attendant. Number 1. The man who survived 133 days, adrift on a raft in the Atlantic. Poom Lim, or Lin Pong, was a Chinese steward serving on the British armed merchant ship SS Ben Lomond. In November 1942, during World War II, the Ben Lomond was sailing from Cape Town, South Africa, towards Suningmo in South America. On November 23rd, about 750 miles east of the Amazon River Delta, the ship was torpedoed and sunk by a German U-boat, U-172. The ship sank in about 2 minutes. Poon Lim, who was 25 years old, was one of 55 men on board. He grabbed a life jacket and jumped overboard just before the ship's boilers exploded. After about 2 hours in the water, he found one of the ship's standard Carley floats, an 8-foot square wooden raft with canvas sides, contained some supplies, a 40-liter, about 10 US gallons, tank of fresh water, some hardtack biscuits, a small bag of sugar lumps, some chocolate, a flashlight, 2 smoke pots, and a small supply of flares. He was the only survivor from the Ben Lomond. Initially, Poon Lim rationed his supplies carefully. He drank water sparingly and ate 2 biscuits a day. When the initial provisions ran out, he had to improvise. He used wire from the flashlight to make a fishhook. He used a nail he pulled from the raft's boards to hook larger fish. He managed to catch fish, and also seabirds, that landed on his raft. He would wring their necks and drink their blood to quench his thirst when rainwater was scarce. Cut the birds open and used their flesh as bait. He collected rainwater using the canvas from his life jacket, carefully storing it in the empty water tins. He faced numerous hardships: scorching sun, storms that threatened to capsize his small raft, and sharks. He learned to swim out from his raft to catch fish if they were out of reach, tying a rope from the raft to his wrist. On one occasion, after a storm had spoiled his fresh water and fish supplies, he managed to catch a shark by luring it close and then clubbing it with the metal water container. He drank the blood from its liver to stave off dehydration. He saw other ships and even planes. He sighted a freighter and later a US Navy patrol plane, but neither spotted him, or if they did, they may have suspected he was a decoy for a U-boat. He kept track of the days by tying knots in a rope. He battled despair and loneliness by talking to himself and singing. His health deteriorated. He suffered from seasickness, sunburn, and saltwater sores. After an incredible 133 days adrift, on April 5, 1943, he was rescued. He had drifted close to the coast of Brazil. 3 Brazilian fishermen in a sailing boat spotted his raft near the mouth of a river. They took him ashore. He had lost about 20 pounds, 9 kg, but was able to walk unaided. He had spent more time alone on a life raft than any other known survivor. King George VI awarded him the British Empire Medal for his extraordinary endurance. When told that no one had ever survived longer on a raft, Poon Lim reportedly replied, I hope no one will ever have to break that record.